Let me tell you a true story that took place in 2023. It's autumn, and Julia, who had just turned 18, is beginning a new chapter in her life. She's moving out of her family home to live independently for the first time. It's a moment she's been dreaming about for years, but at that moment, she had no idea that this apartment would become the stage for her worst nightmare. For months, things were perfect. She quickly grew to love her newfound independence, embracing the freedom and excitement of creating her own space. But then, things started to change. At first, it was just small, unsettling details. She began receiving persistent, anonymous phone calls where no one spoke. Then, flowers started appearing on her doorstep, left without a note. It didn't catch her attention much. Maybe someone had a crush. She didn't want to overthink it. But it quickly became too strange to ignore. Objects in her apartment started disappearing. Sometimes it was a plate, the next day a mug, or even a book. There were even times when she clearly remembered turning off the living room TV, but the next morning, it's on again, like someone's been watching. Julia tried to rationalize it, but after dealing with so many weird things, she started getting freaked out at night. Maybe she was just stressed, but deep down, she knew something wasn't right. On January 18th, 2024 came the night when everything changed. In the evenings, Julia had this routine of watching TV before bed. She had one in the living room and another in her bedroom. Her TV were synchronized, so whatever played on the living room screen showed up in her bedroom too. That night, Julia decided to watch TV in her bedroom, but suddenly, the channels started changing on their own, which meant that someone must be in the living room, holding the remote. Terrified, she froze, but she didn't dare to check if someone was there. Instead, she stayed completely silent all night, hoping that whoever it was would be gone by morning. The next morning, she called her brother to tell him what had happened. But at first, he didn't take her seriously. She kept insisting though, her voice trembling. After hearing the fear in her voice, he agreed to stay with her for a few nights just to make sure everything was okay. For the next 6 days, everything seemed eerily normal. No strange noises, missing items, or signs of anyone entering her apartment. But instead of feeling reassured, Julia was even more terrified. The silence and stillness meant someone was watching her, waiting, and probably biding their time until her brother was no longer around. Her brother did his best to reassure her, reminding her that she could call him any time, though he couldn't stay forever. He also urged her to contact the police at the first hint of anything unusual. 2 days after her brother left, around 10 p.m., Julia heard footsteps in her living room again. This time, she didn't hesitate and called the police immediately. When they arrived, they scoured the apartment, but found nothing. No signs of a break-in, no one hiding. It was like she had imagined the whole thing. But a few days later, around 11 p.m., Julia heard footsteps in her living room again. But this time, instead of calling the police, she decided to call her brother. Her hands trembled as she picked up her phone and called her brother, whispering through tears for him to come over. Her brother immediately promised to be there in 10 minutes and stayed on the line with her, trying to keep her calm. When her brother finally arrived, a tense silence settled in. He was standing outside and looking through the living room window. He could see someone sitting on the couch. Her brother told her to stay in her room and not make a sound. He needed to hang up to call the police before taking any action. Julia found herself alone again, enveloped in the silence of her bedroom, fully aware that a stranger was in her living room. Each passing second felt like an eternity, the weight of fear pressing down on her. But just as her breathing steadied, her phone started ringing. Her brother was calling back, and she'd forgotten to put her phone on silent. The ringtone pierced through the tense silence of the apartment, echoing off the walls like a beacon. Julia's heart sank as she pressed her ear against her bedroom door, straining to hear if the stranger was coming up the stairs. The silence remained unchanged, with no sound of footsteps to break it. But suddenly she heard the sound of her front door opening. Relieved, she thought it must be her brother or the police. Feeling a sense of safety, she decided to open her bedroom door, but as she stepped out, she came face to face with the intruder. Julia screamed, and in a panic, she slammed her bedroom door shut. Using all her strength, she pushed a heavy piece of furniture in front of it to block the intruder. She felt utterly alone, trapped, and at the mercy of whoever lurked just beyond the thin wooden barrier. The handle rattled violently as the person on the other side tried to force their way in. Suddenly, she heard loud thuds and shouting. It was her brother, fighting the intruder. Then, abruptly, silence. Julia froze, unable to discern what had happened on the other side of the door. The oppressive quiet stretched on until finally her brother's voice broke through, reassuring her that it was safe to come out of her room. When she finally opened the door, her brother was kneeling on the intruder's back, pinning him to the floor. In one hand, he held a large knife he had pulled from the man's pocket. The intruder, disheveled and wild-eyed, was struggling weakly beneath him. Minutes later, the police stormed in and took the man into custody. Only after the adrenaline subsided did the horrifying truth come to light. The intruder wasn't a random stranger. He was an ex-boyfriend of Julia's mother from over a decade ago. Back then, his obsession with Julia had been unsettling, and her family had cut all ties. Yet somehow, he had tracked her down, quietly stalking her for months, waiting for his chance. Although the court handed him a 3-year prison sentence, he was released after just 5 months. The news left Julia both angry and deeply unsettled. She couldn't bear the thought of living in fear, always wondering if he might come back. Resolving to take control of her life, she packed up everything and relocated far away, ensuring that her new address stayed completely private. For her, it was the only way to finally put the nightmare behind her.